The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Windsor Castle when Detective Inspector Sarah Chun received the call that would change everything. Her phone buzzed at 6:47 a.m. with a message that made her blood run cold. Code red. Royal children at risk. Immediate response required. What started as a routine security briefing would become the most dangerous 48 hours in modern royal history. 3 young members of the British royal family were about to face a threat so severe that it would test every protocol, every training exercise, and every oath sworn by the elite Royal Protection Squad. This isn't a story about palace intrigue or royal drama. This is about real people facing real danger, where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death, where ordinary men and women in uniform became heroes, and where the safety of children hung in the balance while the entire nation held its breath. The events that unfolded would leave the palace staff speechless, the media scrambling for answers, and the royal guards questioning everything they thought they knew about protecting the most famous family in the world. Sometimes the greatest threats come from where you least expect them. Sometimes heroes emerge from the shadows. And sometimes the price of loyalty is higher than anyone imagined. Detective Inspector Sarah Chun had been protecting the royal family for 12 years, but she had never seen anything like the intelligence report spread across her desk that Tuesday morning. The document, marked with the highest security classification, contained details that made her hands shake as she read each line. The threat assessment team had been tracking unusual activity for weeks. Strange phone calls to palace staff members, suspicious vehicles spotted near royal residences, and, most concerning of all, detailed floor plans of Windsor Castle found on the laptop of an arrested extremist. What made this different from the hundreds of other threats they investigated each year was the level of detail and the specific targeting of the royal children. Prince William's eldest son George, age 10, his daughter Charlotte, age 8, and youngest son Louis, age 5, were all mentioned by name in intercepted communications. The intelligence suggested that a well-organized group had been planning something for months, studying the children's schedules, their school routines, and even their favorite play areas within the castle grounds. Sarah picked up her secure phone and dialed the number she hoped she would never have to use. Commander James Morrison, head of the Royal Protection Squad, answered on the first ring. His voice was calm and professional, but Sarah could hear the tension beneath the surface. Morrison here. Commander, we have a code red situation developing. I need to brief you immediately on a credible threat to the Cambridge children. There was a pause that seemed to last forever. How credible? Extremely. They know details about the children's daily routines that only someone with inside access could provide. Within 20 minutes, every available member of the Royal Protection Squad was racing toward Windsor Castle. The peaceful morning atmosphere was about to be shattered by news that would send shockwaves through the entire royal establishment. Catherine, Princess of Wales, was having breakfast with her 3 children in the private dining room when her personal protection officer, Detective Sergeant Amanda Walsh, entered the room with an expression that immediately caught her attention. The children were laughing about something George had said, completely unaware that their world was about to change. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you privately," Amanda said, her voice carefully controlled but urgent enough that Catherine immediately understood something was wrong. "Children, finish your breakfast. Mummy will be right back," Catherine said, trying to keep her voice light and normal. She followed Amanda into the adjoining sitting room, her heart already beginning to race. "What is it, Amanda?" "Ma'am, we've received intelligence about a serious threat to the children's safety. Commander Morrison is on his way with additional security personnel. We need to implement immediate protective measures." Catherine felt the world tilt slightly. As a mother, her first instinct was to run back to her children and hold them close. As a member of the royal family, she knew she needed to remain calm and follow protocol. "How serious?" "Serious enough that we're treating this as an active threat, ma'am. We'll need to move the children to a secure location within the castle while we assess the situation." Back in the dining room, the 3 children continued their breakfast, completely unaware that their lives had just been turned upside down. George was telling Charlotte about a book he was reading, while 5-year-old Louis was more interested in seeing how many pieces of toast he could stack on top of each other. The innocence of the moment stood in stark contrast to the storm of activity that was beginning to swirl around them. Within the next hour, their comfortable routine would be replaced by security measures that would confine them to the most secure areas of the castle. Commander Morrison arrived at Windsor Castle with a convoy of unmarked vehicles carrying some of the most highly trained protection officers in the world. These men and women had spent years preparing for exactly this type of situation, but the reality of protecting children added a layer of complexity that made everything more challenging. The castle staff watched in confused silence as armed officers took up positions throughout the building. Housekeepers and maintenance workers found themselves being questioned and having their backgrounds verified on the spot. The normal rhythm of palace life ground to a halt as security protocols that had only existed on paper were suddenly put into immediate action. Morrison met with Sarah Chun and the senior protection team in the castle's security command center, a high-tech room hidden behind what appeared to be a normal office door. Multiple screens showed camera feeds from every corner of the castle grounds, while secure communication equipment kept them connected to law enforcement agencies across the country. "What do we know?" Morrison asked as he studied the intelligence reports. "The group calls themselves the People's Voice," Sarah explained. "They've been operating under the radar for months, but their communications suggest they view the royal children as symbols of privilege that need to be eliminated." The word hung in the air like a physical weight. These weren't just protesters or attention seekers. This was a group that had moved beyond anger and rhetoric to actual planning for violence. How close are they to acting? Intelligence suggests they're in the final stages of preparation. "We have evidence they've been conducting surveillance on the castle for weeks, possibly longer." Morrison studied the surveillance photos spread across the table. Men and women with cameras and notebooks, appearing to be tourists but staying much longer than any normal visitor would. License plates from rental cars that had been spotted multiple times near royal residences. Phone records showing calls between known extremist sympathizers. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together to reveal a picture that was more dangerous than anyone had initially realized. Meanwhile, Prince William was in a meeting at Kensington Palace when his protection officer interrupted with news that made him go pale. The meeting was immediately canceled as he raced toward Windsor Castle, his mind filled with every parent's worst nightmare. The drive that normally took 45 minutes was completed in less than 30 as his protection team used every emergency protocol available. William's hands gripped his phone as he tried calling Catherine, but all personal communications had been temporarily suspended for security reasons. Back at Windsor, Catherine had managed to move the children to what the security team called the safe room, a reinforced area deep within the castle that most visitors never even knew existed. The children thought it was an adventure at first, but as the hours passed and they weren't allowed to leave, their mood began to change. "Mummy, why can't we go outside?" Charlotte asked, pressing her face against the small window that looked out onto the castle courtyard. "It's just a precaution, darling. Daddy will be here soon, and then we'll know more." George, being the oldest, seemed to sense that something more serious was happening. "Is someone trying to hurt us?" The directness of the question caught Catherine off guard. She had been trying to shield them from the reality of the situation, but her eldest son was too perceptive to be easily fooled. "There are some people who might want to cause trouble," she said carefully. "But we have very good people protecting us, and they're making sure we stay safe." Outside the safe room, the protection team was working frantically to understand the full scope of the threat. Phone calls were being made to contacts in intelligence agencies around the world. Background checks were being run on anyone who had access to the castle. Security camera footage was being reviewed hour by hour, looking for anything suspicious. The afternoon brought the news that everyone had been dreading. A van filled with explosives had been discovered parked 3 miles from the castle, abandoned after what appeared to be a failed attempt to get closer to the royal residence. The bomb disposal team found enough explosive material to level a city block. They were planning something big, Morrison told his team after receiving the report. This wasn't going to be a kidnapping or a simple attack. They wanted to cause maximum damage and casualties. The discovery of the explosives transformed the situation from serious to critical. This wasn't just about protecting the children anymore. This was about preventing what could have been one of the most devastating terrorist attacks in British history. As evening approached, the castle felt more like a fortress under siege than a royal residence. Armed officers patrolled every corridor. Vehicles were being searched before being allowed anywhere near the property. The airspace above the castle had been declared a no-fly zone. The children had been confined to the safe room for over 8 hours now, and their patience was beginning to wear thin. Louis had started crying, asking when he could go to his own room. Charlotte was worried about her pet rabbit, who lived in a hutch in the castle gardens. George was asking increasingly difficult questions about what was happening. Catherine tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, reading stories and playing games, but the stress was beginning to show. Every time she heard footsteps in the corridor outside, she tensed, wondering if this was the moment when the worst news would arrive. When William finally arrived at the castle, the reunion was emotional but brief. The protection team needed to brief him on the full extent of the threat, and every minute spent in planning could be crucial to keeping the family safe. "How long do we need to stay like this?" William asked after being shown the intelligence reports. "Until we can locate and neutralize the remaining members of the group," Morrison replied. "We know who some of them are, but there are others still unaccounted for." The first day of the crisis was ending, but for the royal family and their protection team, the worst was yet to come. Somewhere out there, dangerous people were still planning to do harm to 3 innocent children whose only crime was being born into a family they never chose. As night fell over Windsor Castle, the protection team settled in for what they knew would be a long and sleepless vigil. They had trained for years for exactly this type of situation, but nothing could have prepared them for the emotional weight of knowing that the lives of 3 children depended on their skill, their vigilance, and their ability to stay one step ahead of people who had already proven they were willing to kill. The second day began with news that chilled everyone involved in the protection operation. During the night, 3 more members of the extremist group had been arrested in raids across London, but the interrogations revealed information that made the threat even more immediate and personal. Detective Inspector Sarah Chun stood in the command center at 5:30 a.m., studying photographs and documents that had been seized during the arrests. The level of planning was extraordinary. The group had detailed architectural drawings of Windsor Castle, including areas that weren't available to the public. They had photographs of the children taken with telephoto lenses during public appearances. Most disturbing of all, they had personal information about the family's daily routines that could only have come from someone with inside access. "We have a leak," Sarah announced to Commander Morrison as he entered the command center with his morning coffee. "Someone inside the royal household has been feeding them information." Morrison's face darkened as he reviewed the evidence. In his 25 years of protecting the royal family, he had dealt with external threats countless times, but the possibility of an insider threat was every protection officer's worst nightmare. "How certain are we?" "Look at this." Sarah pointed to a document that showed the exact times when the children typically moved between different areas of the castle. "This information changes weekly, and it's only known to a handful of people. Someone with regular access has been watching and reporting." The realization that someone trusted with the family's safety had betrayed them added a new dimension of danger to an already critical situation. Now they had to protect the children not just from external threats, but potentially from someone already inside their protective circle. Meanwhile, in the safe room, the royal children were beginning their second day of confinement, and the strain was starting to show. 5-year-old Louis had barely slept, kept awake by the unfamiliar sounds of armed guards moving through the corridors outside. Charlotte had been asking repeatedly about her school friends, and when she could see them again. George, ever perceptive, had begun asking more direct questions about the danger they faced. "Mummy," George said during breakfast, "are the bad people trying to hurt us because we're in the royal family?" Catherine paused, a spoonful of cereal halfway to her mouth. She had been dreading this question, knowing that her answer would mark a turning point in her children's understanding of their place in the world. Until now, they had been largely sheltered from the darker realities of royal life. "There are some people who don't like our family," she said carefully. "But there are many, many more people who care about us and want to keep us safe. But why don't they like us? We haven't done anything bad to them." The innocence of the question broke Catherine's heart. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that some people hate what you represent rather than who you are? How do you help a child understand that their very existence can inspire such strong emotions in people they've never met? Outside the safe room, the protection team was working around the clock to identify the insider threat. Every staff member who had access to information about the children's routines was being investigated. Background checks that had been done years ago were being repeated with more scrutiny. Personal relationships, financial situations, and recent behavior patterns were all being examined for signs of betrayal. Detective Sergeant Amanda Walsh, Catherine's personal protection officer, found herself in the uncomfortable position of suspecting people she had worked alongside for years. The tight-knit community of Royal Protection officers prided itself on trust and loyalty, but now everyone was viewing their colleagues with suspicion. The breakthrough came at noon when digital forensics experts analyzing seized computers and phones made a discovery that shocked everyone involved in the investigation. The insider wasn't a protection officer or a senior staff member, as they had assumed. It was Emma Richardson, a 23-year-old housekeeping assistant who had been working at the castle for only 6 months. Emma had seemed like an ideal employee. She was polite, hardworking, and had passed all the standard background checks. What the investigation revealed was that she had been recruited by the extremist group months before she even applied for the job. Her entire employment at Windsor Castle had been part of the larger plan to harm the royal children. She's been playing the long game, Morrison explained to his team as they reviewed Emma's file. They planted her here specifically to gather intelligence and provide access when the time came. The young woman had used her position cleaning the family's private quarters to photograph documents, memorize schedules, and map out security weak points. She had even taken pictures of the safe room where the children were now hiding, though those photos had been taken before the current crisis began. Armed police arrested Emma Richardson as she reported for work that afternoon, having no idea that her cover had been blown. The arrest was swift and quiet, designed not to alert any other potential conspirators who might still be in the area. During her interrogation, Emma revealed details that made the protection team realize how close they had come to disaster. The original plan had been for her to drug the children's breakfast on Wednesday morning, making them easy targets for kidnapping. When that plan was discovered and prevented by the heightened security measures, the group had shifted to a more violent approach. They're planning a direct assault on the castle, Emma told investigators, seeming almost relieved to finally tell the truth. Tonight, they have weapons and explosives, and they know exactly where the safe room is located. The information sent shockwaves through the protection team. Despite all their security measures, despite moving the children to what they thought was the most secure location in the castle, their position had been compromised from the beginning. Morrison immediately ordered the children to be moved to a new location, but the options were limited. The castle's other secure areas weren't designed to house a family for an extended period, and moving the children outside the castle would expose them to even greater risks. "We have a helicopter standing by," Sarah suggested. "We could move them to a military base or another royal residence." "No," William said firmly when presented with the option. "Moving them makes them more vulnerable. These people seem to know our every move. At least here, we control the environment." The debate continued for precious minutes while the clock ticked toward evening and the promised attack. Finally, Morrison made the decision that would define the rest of the crisis. "We stay and fight," he announced. "But we do it on our terms." Instead of simply waiting for the attack to come, the protection team decided to turn Windsor Castle into a trap. They would allow the extremists to come to them, but every step of the assault would be anticipated and countered. The afternoon was spent in intense preparation. Additional armed response teams were brought in from London. Specialists in urban warfare and hostage situations took up positions throughout the castle. Security cameras were repositioned to eliminate blind spots. Emergency communication systems were tested, and backup power supplies were verified. The children were moved to a new safe room that Emma Richardson had never seen, located in the castle's oldest section behind walls that were 3 feet thick and had withstood centuries of conflict. The room was equipped with its own air supply and communication equipment, and could be sealed completely if necessary. It's like a real castle from the old days, Lewis said with excitement when he saw the massive stone walls and narrow windows. For him, the move was an adventure. He didn't understand that those thick walls might soon be all that stood between his family and people who wanted to kill them. As the sun began to set, the protection team received final intelligence updates about the expected assault. The extremist group was larger than initially thought, with at least 8 members who had military or police training. They were heavily armed and had explosives capable of breaching even reinforced walls. They're not planning to take prisoners, Morrison told his team during the final briefing. This is a mission to kill the children and cause maximum damage to the royal family and the institution of the monarchy. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. These men and women had sworn an oath to protect the royal family with their lives if necessary, and tonight they might be called upon to fulfill that oath in the most literal way possible. William and Catherine were given a final briefing about what to expect during the assault. They were shown how to operate the emergency communication equipment in the safe room and what to do if the outer defenses were breached. If they get through our perimeter, Morrison explained gently, you'll have approximately 10 minutes before they reach your location. Use that time to contact the outside world and tell them what happened here. Catherine gripped William's hand tightly as the reality of the situation hit home. They were essentially being asked to write their own final messages while their children played with toys just a few feet away. As darkness fell over Windsor Castle, the protection team took their final positions. Snipers were positioned on the castle towers with night vision equipment and high-powered rifles. Armed response teams were hidden in corridors and rooms throughout the building. The trap was set. Outside the castle walls, surveillance teams reported movement in the surrounding countryside. Vehicles without lights were approaching from multiple directions. Heat sensors detected people moving through the woods that surrounded the castle grounds. At 11:17 p.m., the first shots were fired. The assault on Windsor Castle had begun, and 3 innocent children sleeping in a stone room deep within the ancient fortress had no idea that their lives now depended on the courage and skill of people they had never met, fighting a battle that would determine not just their survival, but the future of the British monarchy itself. The protection team's radios crackled with urgent communications as the attackers breached the outer perimeter. Every officer knew that the next few hours would test everything they had trained for, everything they believed in, and everything they were willing to sacrifice to keep 3 children safe from harm. The sub-basement beneath Windsor Castle was a place that existed in official blueprints, but had been forgotten by most of the living world. Built during the reign of Henry II as storage for siege supplies, the stone chamber had walls 8 feet thick and had survived everything from medieval wars to German bombing raids during World War II. William led his family through the narrow entrance, using a flashlight to navigate passages that hadn't seen regular use in decades. The air was cold and damp, filled with the musty smell of centuries-old stone and mortar. For the 3 young children, tired and frightened after hours of confinement, this underground refuge felt more like a dungeon than a place of safety. "How long do we have to stay down here, Daddy?" George asked as they settled onto emergency blankets spread across the stone floor. "Just until the policemen catch the last bad person," William replied, though privately he wondered how long that might take. Reports coming through his radio indicated that the final attacker had seemingly vanished into the vast maze of rooms and corridors that made up Windsor Castle. Above them, the hunt for Marcus Webb, the explosives expert who had planned and led the assault, had turned into a deadly game of hide and seek through one of the world's most famous buildings. Webb was a former British Army sergeant who had been discharged for extremist views 5 years earlier. His military training made him exceptionally dangerous, and his knowledge of explosives meant that he could potentially bring down significant portions of the castle, even working alone. Commander Morrison coordinated the search from the command center, watching thermal imaging displays that showed heat signatures moving through the castle. The problem was distinguishing between his own protection officers and the remaining threat. "All units, sound off with your current positions," he ordered over the radio, hoping to isolate any movement that couldn't be accounted for by his own people. One by one, the protection officers reported their locations as they methodically searched every room, every closet, every possible hiding place in the vast complex. But Marcus Webb seemed to have disappeared like a ghost. Detective Inspector Sarah Chun studied the castle's architectural plans, trying to think like a fugitive with military training and a desperate mission to complete. Where would someone like Webb go when his carefully planned assault had fallen apart? He's not trying to escape, she realized suddenly. He's positioning himself for one final attack. The insight hit her like a physical blow. Webb wasn't hiding because he was afraid. He was hiding because he was planning something that required time and careful preparation. Somewhere in the castle, he was setting up what military experts call a dead man's switch, a final devastating blow that would achieve his goals even if it cost him his life. All teams, we need to expand the search too.